Hey, Go Peter here. It's time to check out the brand new and completely free sustain Dan Hung Permansa Teray, or Peter, or Dante, or Dan GPT. Whatever you call him, he will still be a very potent team-wide shielder that also comes with substantial utility, whether that be boosting attack, improving your synergies with Sunday, or more. We'll check out his simple but nice kit, and then his Eidolons, and finish with builds and team synergies. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like and subscribe and comment below what you think of him. And now, let's begin. So after years of waiting, okay, only one and a bit, we got a new preservation, and Dan Hung is our first physical preservation unit. For stats, he has the highest defense value in the game alongside Firefly for some reason despite not using it at all for shielding. Anyways, for leveling up his abilities, you'll just want to level up his talent, ult, and skill altogether and ignore his basics. He will use all three for shielding, and his ult also offers some offensive power. And now for those abilities. Dan Hung's skill will designate an ally as his bondmate. Then he provides all allies with a shield scaling on his attack, plus a large flat amount for 3 turns. Just like Aventurine, our newest preservation unit can also stack his shield further, and Danny's will stack until 300% of the shield value from his skill. But what does this bondmate effect do? Well, when an ally becomes the bondmate, Soul Dragon will be summoned, and it has a speed of 165. Except unlike every other classic summon unit, aka Jinyuan, Topaz, and Linksha, this dragon will be summoned for the bondmate. This means it counts as their summon. So for example, if we use Sunday skill on our DPS with Soul Dragon on them, instead of getting the usual 30% damage for a non-summon hypercarry, we now get a whopping 80%. 50% extra damage from your sustain if using Sunday is pretty potent. It could be nearly 20% damage jump on a carry with some damage already in their kit. Not to mention that Sunday skilling will also bring up Soul Dragon right behind your DPS, just like any other summon. And this works if you have a summon already, Sunday will just move both. But that's not all. You can also, for example, activate the Banana Amusement Park planar set now if you farmed some of those. This is one of the highest crit value sets in the game, so having access to that is also really nice. I hope we see some more summon interactions that we can use with Dan Hung in the future, but now what does Soul Dragon do? Well, when they take action, we get a team-wide dispel of 1 debuff. On top of that, it provides a shield that has half the potency of the skill's shield. But yet again, we can stack the shield, so what this actually does is ensure shield uptime. The problem we have sometimes with Aventurine is shields falling off with high action advance. Well, now you have much better uptime as Soul Dragon has a high speed of 165, among some other action count based benefits we'll see later. As for Danny's ultimate, he will do damage to all enemies, which will do like no damage, and then provide yet again a shield, this time the same strength as the skills. But then, Soul Dragon is enhanced for 2 actions. Now, when Soul Dragon acts, it launches a follow-up attack, dealing damage to all enemies yet again. But on top of that, you will now get additional damage based on the bondmate stats and type. It is 80% of their attack at level 10, so you're getting 80 to 400% attack multipliers extra on your DPS whenever this enhanced dragon acts. That is pretty powerful, since multiply buffs or sources are very rare, and it's also nice for helping out single target DPS in AoE scenarios. Now note that this follow-up attack does not count as an attack of the character that Dan Hung summoned it for. The additional damage is the character's damage, but additional damage does not count as them attacking or hitting for any effects that rely on that. Finally, the technique is basically Sridget's. You will gain bondmate that will transfer around when switching characters pre-combat. When entering, you'll get a free skill usage on the character that enters without consuming SP. It's very cool, and it ensures you have shields up immediately, and you also ensure Soul Dragon is summoned at the start of combat. Though this automatic skill can be annoying for some teams, as for example Dot enters with Kafka, and we'd want bondmate on high ceilings. Anyways, just a small problem as you can skill again on his turn. Now let's finish with his bonus abilities. His A2 shows us why bondmate is even more important to have on your carry. He will in fact buff attack of the bondmate by an amount equal to 15% of his own attack. So if he has 4000 attack, that's 600 flat attack for your carry. It may be diluted in the case of a Robin, but if you don't consider a Robin, that can be upwards of another 15% damage amp permanently from a sustain. Now, what about Daniel? He needs some love too. Well, his A4 first gives him an inbuilt Vonwhack. Now he can get ahead of the team and start generating SP ASAP, or giving an extra skill in the case of some compositions. Him and Soul Dragon now get benefits as well from the bondmate, About Time. When the bondmate uses an attack, Danheng regenerates 6 energy, and Soul Dragon is advanced by 15%. This means your DPS is now battering Danheng, and it also means more DPS attacks can provide even better shield uptime. Finally, here's A6. Soul Dragon will take pity on the character with the weakest shield amount and give a small bonus to them whenever Soul Dragon takes an action. This is a quarter of the skill's shield effect. As for the enhanced Soul Dragon, it now gets another instance of damage. It is half the value of the normal amount, so only 40% attack, but at least it goes to the enemy with the highest HP, so a tribute effect. If considering 3 targets and a decently long fight as well as 6 Soul Dragon attacks, these extra attack multipliers can provide another 10% DPS increase. Note on all of these simulations I'm using the same base and Naxxas sim that can vary from other characters' performances. And in trace bonuses we get a buff to attack, thankfully, as well as some speed and then some defense because why not base tank everything. Before we talk about his value, let's see Eidolon's. Remember, he is free, so you do start at E0 when pulling. That doesn't mean you should pull extra copies just because he's free. Now, Danheng's E1 is a pretty border one for some compositions. At least universally, we can agree that 18% all-time res pen for your bondmate after ulting is pretty nice for a sustained vertical investment option, and is in a vacuum another 18% DPS increase. It will suffer if you use a multi-DPS comp, but for hypercarry it is potent. Now it doesn't end there. Ulting on Danheng also now recovers 1 SP. This is also very powerful, but not in every comp. It kinda makes him have the SP generation of Gallagher now though. If you basic every turn and then ult gives 1 SP, it's like that action advance mechanic Gallagher gets. Either way, awesome for SP gen and some buffing, but he functions just great without it. E2 then offers some more multiplier power. We get 4 enhanced Soul Dragons per ult rather than 2, so twice the amount of extra multipliers for your carry. We then get a 100% advance forward on Soul Dragon after Dan ults, E2 deal reference mayhaps. So more Soul Dragon turns straight up, and I guess some help with shields if you ever need it. And then we get a buff to the additional damage and shield from said enhanced turns. Now, this Eidolon varies depending on your carry. If we again consider that an Naxxas sim and add double the damage and double the dragons, we get a 30% DPS increase. But a Finan, for example, cannot let Danheng ult again so soon if he is departed, and a less frequent attacking carry also prevents as many Soul Dragons. E4 is then some damage reduction and not a pull target, and E6 takes the damage up some more. We get a permanent 20% vulnerability, 12% death ignore for the bondmate, and then ulting on Danheng finally does damage with 330% additional bondmate base damage to all targets. That is a whopping 1650% in AoE, and altogether in the sim, that's another 25% or more DPS increase over the previous Eidolon. But remember, that's a whole lot of pulls, and not as crazy as some DPS or support Eidolons. So with that all out of the way, what do I think of Danheng Pymancer Terray? Well, first of all, he is a very good sustain and free, so I'm happy that everyone gets some free help with enemy damage getting higher. Especially when considering Anomaly Arbitration, as even though it doesn't give Stellar Jades, that Interference Key is a lovely pickup, and sustaining enough for the 1-star has proven tricky for some players. But sustaining isn't all he does, he also provides a bunch of buffs and utility. If we add 600 attack, 50% damage from Sunday's new synergy, and a decent amount of Soul Dragon attacks on my 3.2 and Naxxas sim, we get over a 50% DPS increase combined versus using a non-buffing sustain like Gallagher. A 1.5 times increase to your carry's damage from a sustain is very, very good, and can get to something like 2 times with E1S1. If the carry prefers Banana Amusement over their current option, another small increase. And you could consider other sets like Sakados and the new Recluse set, but healers can use their own buffing sets anyway. Now, some of it is slightly conditional. More multipliers from a Saridra would nerf the Soul Dragon impact, though, to be honest, more skills on a Naxxa would mean more dragons anyway. But for example, not using Sunday would significantly nerf his buffs. But he does just work, and always gives a bunch of attack and multipliers, and he's always going to be SP positive while sustaining your team with great uptime, at least outside of Anomaly Arbitration. He will be one of the best sustains in any attack-based team, and likely the best if using Sunday. I can only see some teams like E0 Aglaya and maybe Saber prefer Horhor or Quid Pro Quo Gallagher. Now, his sustain is still not perfect in Anomaly Arbitration until S1, but he can still sustain okay at S0 with some extra skill points. And having cleanse rather than immediate F-res can sometimes hurt, like in the case of Entanglement on these lions. I hate these lions so much. I also think you should be wise when playing him. You can miss on some Soul Dragons and also waste shield power if ulting too early or using attacks at wrong moments. If you see your shield drop, maybe check these things to see if you could have done something better. If you invest an E1 on top, he gets even better in buffing rather than just going for more sustain, and he actually has a decent buffing signature unlike most sustains, though luckily it's not Hyacinth level. So on that note, let's move on to Lycones. Though Worlds Apart starts off with one of the craziest attack buffs of 64%. When ulting, the wearer can now also heal all allies based on the wearer's attack. Interesting. And then all allies will get a damage percent buff, increased if they have a summon. So basically, strong shields, slightly better attack buff, some healing, and then team-wide damage with a little extra for your carry with Soul Dragon. It is definitely nice to have, but a luxury, and he does not need this to function or sustain well. And remember, even if your shields fall off from some big attack, you still have the rest of your HP bar until you die anyway. Now, funnily enough, in most of my testing, I didn't even touch this light cone. A sustain should not need a light cone to sustain, and he doesn't. I didn't even use a preservation cone. In fact, I just used a high attack cone from a completely different path. And that's what you should probably do if not pulling his signature. There are some benefits from preservation cones, but not too many, and getting a high attack provides both buffing and shielding capabilities. So funnily enough, you can even use Dill's light cone on him because of that high base attack whilst also carrying on Dill's will to the next version. Losing out on base attack when we're going to be spamming attack beams and subs is not ideal, and losing it for some weak bonuses is not worth it. So for calcs, instead of the usual damage in a team, here are the attack buff amounts, amp difference in the base and axis sim, and the shield power. I've also included notes like Japard's cone being useful for EHR in a Kafka team for her attack percent buff. Note that the amp difference is usually very low, but the shield is what matters. And on the topic of light cone, S1 versus E1, the classic question. Well, it's a tough one. I just say E1 most of the time because the amp is better and because the SP can be really useful in some teams like Anaxa compositions, Dot, the Herta, Archer. But S1 is close behind in amp, it costs less pulls, and it helps more in sustaining, notably for Anomaly Arbitration, but I do not like the idea of pulling extra stuff for a Stellar Jadeless game mode. I can see either being a good investment and really depends on what you prefer or need in your teams. But now let's discuss his build. The brand new Self-Enshrouded Recluse set is the de facto shield farm with shield effect buffs and crit damage for anyone shielded. It is very easy to maintain and helps with sustain. If you have his signature, however, he now technically heals, and that makes him a target for the Warrior Goddess set, providing speed over shield effect and a similar buff otherwise. Though this does require you to maintain consistent ults as the buff only lasts 2 turns. Finally, if using him with Finan, you can do the Ceridra strategy of running Sakados for an even bigger buff of 36% crit damage rather than 15%. He was skill for free with this technique, and then skill again on his turn. Maybe you don't have the SP for this though, and the buff can run out on some teams, and he also can't go behind Finan like Ceridra can in said teams. As for the planar ornaments, Lusaka is your best bet. More attack buffing is coolio for your hypercarry teams, and a bit of energy can't go wrong. Penacony also works with a physical carry. Broken Keel, if building up to 30% F-res, is also chill, but that requires a bunch of substats. Then we have his main stat selection. Dan Heng will want an attack chest, speed boots, attack orb, and then energy rope. Do not go crit chest, it is troll. He doesn't do damage, he does damage through the carry stats. Do not go physical damage orb for the same reason. And even if it somehow brought a bit more damage from Dan Heng, remember, every time you drop an attack piece, you're also dropping buff power and shield potency. Just don't do it. For the other 2 pieces, speed boots are great for SP and energy generation, or making sure you're fast to shield up the team if necessary. And energy rope is wanted for more multipliers for your carry, and the ult also gives out chunky shields, so it's not a detriment to your sustain capabilities. For a stat goal, your attack will vary heavily on the light cone, but aim for at least 3k, and you could try to get 4k with high base attack cones like off-path ones. Remember, he only really needs attack and speed. Speaking of speed, aim for a speed around your team's amount as a good base, and then you can go high if you like, for example a common goal like 160. Though him taking another action at the 160 breakpoint isn't going to change much most of the time, just making him fast without hurting his shield power is the goal here, do not worry about specifics. But finally, let's talk about synergies. As said before, he can really go anywhere that uses attack, but what parts of him synergize with who? Well, the SP generation synergizes with many teams. The Herta, Dot, Anaxa, Finan, Archer. All of these teams consume considerable amounts of SP, and having a fast sustain B+1 a turn can really help. And it doesn't impact sustain in most modes, and then he provides benefits on top. His attack frequency can also help some teams. Acheron with E2 Silverwolf, Fei Xiao, the Herta, They can all use his basic spams, and then ults, and then enhance Soul Dragons to battery their ultimates. And his attack buff and multiply bonuses benefit every attack scaling carry in the game. The only team that doesn't abuse it as much as others is Dot, as they are not going to be doing big crit damage, but it's still okay, and the attack buff is still there. And if you run a team with Sunday, he only gets better. He forms a really strong core duo for any attack hypercarry. Head with Cereja for units like Anax and Finan, and you have a tremendous trio. And Sunday focusing all on damage and crit and being universal and stuff actually makes that attack buff from Dan even more desirable for these teams. Finally, the damage percent gain Sunday gives with the summon on top is pretty strong, but him bringing up Soul Dragon every turn is also nice for sustain. Though to be honest, at the same time, that advance on Soul Dragon isn't always necessary because of the 165 speed they have, but also because of the action advance they get. For example, Cereja with Anaxa. With Sunday, you'd get Soul Dragon, Anaxa, Sunday, Anaxa 4 skills, Soul Dragon, but all that advance is wasted. With Bronya, you'd have Soul Dragon, Anaxa skills, Bronya, Anaxa 4 skills, which is then 90% advance for a 165 speed Soul Dragon, who will thus act right after anyway. Even if it wasn't Anaxa, it'd still be a minimum of 30% advance forward for the dragon for acting twice. And so even without an advanced forward unit, some characters just attack a ton and can bring up the dragon easily, or you just use a skill point on Dan. I'd say two big synergies though are Anaxa and Finan, again. He wasn't made for them, I'd say like Cereja was, but they benefit greatly. In MSC, he just acts as a really nice sustain, useful for Anaxa, and eventually useful for Finan when you can't finish the fight in an ult or two. In Pure Fiction, he gives us some AoE attacks, which can help clear trash mobs and push a bit more score. And in Apocalyptic Shadow, he does the Wearer's type damage, but not their element when attacking. I wish he did that, to be honest. But what this means is he can't help with Break unless it's versus physical weak, and Finan and Anaxa can both guarantee this. As for Finan specifically, we get 2 instant core flames with Dan for a combo of Dan Hung Technique, skill, Cereja Technique, skill and ult, Finan skill, Sunday skill and ult, Finan skill, Dan Hung ult into Finan ult. Lovely. With Dan, we now have another source of multipliers like Cereja in the Khazlan estate, despite Danny not being on field. We get pretty sizable buffs despite losing a potential Bronya, and we still have a good core flame rotation despite losing again that Bronya, all whilst being a sustain. Of course, premium sustainers will be stronger, but eventually the damage check is going to be too difficult. Final players don't need Dan in some game modes and can lose damage with him, but he's a comfy 4th slot now. But let me know what you guys think of him, and if you're planning on building him up or even pulling extra. I think he's beautiful. Thanks to my amazing YouTube members, thank you guys for watching, and have a good day.